I threw a simple backyard party for my 10-year-old grandson. In response, my family sent me a $5,000 bill, and when I refused to pay, they called the police and accused me of a crime. This is how one birthday cake almost sent me to prison. My name is Esther. For 40 years, I was a nurse. I've held hands through heart attacks, calmed terrified parents in the ER, and seen just about everything this life can throw at a person. I thought I was strong enough for anything. But nothing prepares you for the moment your own family decides you're no longer a person, but a problem to be eliminated. I threw a party for my 10-year-old grandson, the light of my life, and invited the family who swore they adored him. Nobody came. A week later, my sister sent an invoice demanding I sponsor a $5,000 table at her daughter's debutante ball. When I finally found the courage to say no for the first time in my life, they didn't just get angry. They called the police. They looked a detective in the eye and accused me of a crime so serious, it could have stripped me of my home, my savings, and my freedom. They tried to erase me. But they forgot one thing. I'm the one who kept all the receipts. Before all that, before the blue lights flashed against my living room window, my life was built on a quiet, steady rhythm of service. I live in a small but tidy house in Charleston, the kind with a porch swing and azaleas that bloom furiously every April. After my daughter passed, raising my grandson Michael became my world. For the rest of the family, I was the bedrock. The one they called when a car broke down, when my brother Gary needed another small loan for a business that never materialized, or when my sister Tiffany needed a last-minute babysitter. I was the keeper of traditions, the host of every holiday, the emotional backstop for every crisis. I never saw it as a burden. I saw it as the glue that held us all together. I wonder if you've ever been the glue for so long you forget you're not just there to hold other people's broken pieces. I was so busy fixing everything for them, I never realized I was the one who was slowly breaking. That sense of duty, of always showing up, was why I never imagined they wouldn't do the same for Michael. For his 10th birthday, all he wanted was an Explorers Club party in the backyard. It wasn't fancy, not by Charleston standards. There was no catering, no elaborate floral arrangements. Instead, there was me, up at dawn, stringing a banner I'd painted myself between two old oak trees. The humid morning air was thick with the smell of freshly cut grass and the promise of a happy day. I'd set up a small tent as the base camp, filled a cooler with juice boxes, and had a big sheet cake from Costco decorated with a treasure map. I remember Tiffany's text from the week before, full of heart emojis. An explorer party. How adorable. We'll be there. Gary had called, promising to bring his famous 7-layer dip. My own mother had said, "Of course, darling." I wouldn't miss it for the world. I believed them. I set out 3 extra lawn chairs under the biggest oak, in the best patch of shade, just for them. The party started at 2 o'clock. Michael's friends arrived, a whirlwind of energy and laughter, immediately starting a game of tag that crisscrossed the entire yard. I grilled hot dogs, refilled bowls of chips, and watched Michael's face, flushed with pure joy. But my own smile felt thin, brittle. My phone was a dead weight in my pocket. Every 20 minutes, I'd slip back into the kitchen, ostensibly to grab more napkins, but really just to stare at the blank screen. The family group chat, usually buzzing with trivial updates, was silent. Every time a car drove down the street, my head would snap up with a jolt of hope, only to watch it pass by. Have you ever felt that physical ache of waiting for a message that you know, deep down, isn't coming? I kept catching Michael's eye, and he'd give me this radiant, trusting smile. He didn't notice the empty chairs yet, but I did. They were like holes in the fabric of the day, growing bigger with every passing hour. By 5 o'clock, the last of Michael's friends had been picked up, leaving a quiet yard littered with paper plates and tired-looking balloons. Michael and I cleaned up together in the fading light. He didn't ask where they were. Not directly. He just looked at the 3 empty chairs for a long moment, then said, "I guess Grandma got busy." It was the "I guess" that broke my heart. At 10 years old, he was already learning to make excuses for the people who should have been moving mountains to be there for him. We went inside, and while he started building a new Lego set, I began washing the dishes, the silence of the house pressing in on me. That's when my phone buzzed. It wasn't them. It was a friend from my old nursing days, a woman named Patty. The text just said, "Thinking of you, honey. Don't let them get you down." Attached was a screenshot. My hands were still wet with dish soap as I opened the image. And there they were. My sister Tiffany, holding a flute of champagne, her hair blowing perfectly in the sea breeze. My brother Gary, leaning back in a deck chair, wearing sunglasses that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. And my mother, laughing, her head thrown back in carefree delight. They were on a magnificent yacht, the kind you see docked in the Charleston harbor, and wonder who has that kind of life. In the background, the sun was setting behind the Ravenel Bridge, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The caption, posted by Tiffany, was what truly stole my breath. It read, "A perfect Saturday with my favorite people. So important to make time for the ones who truly matter. Number. Family first, number. Blessed." They hadn't just forgotten. They had replaced us. And then they had broadcast it to the world. Isn't it amazing how the people who shout the loudest about family values are often the first to abandon them? I stood there in my quiet kitchen, looking at the half-eaten birthday cake on the counter, and felt a cold, hard clarity settle in my bones. It was the beginning of an ending. The week that followed was silent. Not a peaceful quiet, but a heavy, ringing silence, filled with the things that weren't being said. There was no apology call, no text explaining what happened. It was as if Michael's birthday and our hurt had never existed. They simply erased it. In a way, the silence was more honest than any excuse they could have fabricated. It was a statement of our importance or lack thereof. I tried to fill the quiet for Michael's sake, with trips to the library and extra time at the park, but I felt like I was moving through a dream. The image of that champagne flute on the yacht burned into my mind. I started to believe that perhaps this was the new normal, a cold distance that was painful but, at least, honest. I was wrong. The silence wasn't an ending. It was the calm before a storm of entitlement I could never have imagined. On Friday morning, an email landed in my inbox. The subject line read, "A celebration for Amelia, RSVP required." Amelia was my niece. It was from Tiffany, but it wasn't written like a personal note. It was cold, formal, and had a glossy PDF attachment that looked like a corporate sponsorship package. The email explained that my niece Amelia's debutante ball was not just a party, but a major social event in the Charleston charity scene. The attached PDF detailed the sponsorship opportunities for family members to contribute. My eyes scanned the page, feeling a growing sense of surreal disbelief. There was the Magnolia patron for $10,000, the Palmetto patron for $7,500. And then I saw the line item Tiffany had so generously assigned to me, the Charleston Friend tier, for $5,000. The email read, "Esther, I know you love being part of these family milestones, so I went ahead and put your name down for a table. It's the most affordable one. We'll need the Zelle transfer by next Friday to finalize with the venue. So excited to celebrate with you. Have you ever been invisible until someone needed your wallet?" It was a special kind of hollowness. One week my grandson was worth less than a mimosa. The next, my bank account was a mandatory part of their social climbing. I just sat there, staring at my computer screen, the number $5,000 pulsing in my vision. It felt like a typo, a joke, a hallucination. How could a family that couldn't be bothered to show up for a child's birthday party, an event that cost nothing but time and love, turn around and demand a sum of money that was more than my monthly mortgage? My mind was a whirlwind of hurt and disbelief, trying to reconcile the smiling faces on the yacht with the cold demand in my inbox. I hadn't even had time to formulate a response, to even process the sheer audacity of it all, when my phone rang. The caller ID read, "Mom." A part of me, the part that had been conditioned for 60 years to please her, felt a flicker of hope. Maybe she was calling to say it was all a mistake. I was wrong. Her voice was syrupy sweet, dripping with forced enthusiasm. "Esther, darling, did you see Tiffany's wonderful email? I'm just bursting with pride. A debutante ball. It's what our family is all about: tradition, legacy. I hesitated, my throat suddenly dry. Mom, I started, it's a lot of money. And you know, after Michael's party. I couldn't even finish the sentence. She cut me off, and the sweetness in her voice curdled into something cold and sharp. Don't be difficult, Esther. This is about showing a united front. You know, I'm meeting with the estate lawyer next week to finalize my will. That house your father and I built, the one on South of Broad, it's worth over $750,000 now. It would be a tragedy if I had to decide that only the children who truly support this family's legacy should be included in its future. She let that hang in the air for a moment before adding, think of Michael's inheritance. She was holding my grandson's future hostage for a party sponsorship. It's a terrifying thing when you realize the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally are actually keeping a ledger. And my account was suddenly in the red. I ended the call. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I just quietly pressed the red icon on my screen. And in the silence that followed, something inside me that had been bent for 60 years finally snapped straight. Her threat wasn't the straw that broke the camel's back, it was the anvil. She thought she was leveraging my love for my grandson, but what she really did was hold a mirror up to the truth. This wasn't love, it was a transaction. A hostile takeover of my life, my finances, and my future. And the terms were no longer acceptable. For my entire life, I had been the family's shock absorber, soaking up every crisis, every demand, every bit of selfishness, and responding with a gentle, forgiving cushion. But shock absorbers wear out. And when they do, you finally feel the full impact of the road. I felt it then. And I knew I couldn't take another mile. I sat down at my computer, my hands perfectly steady. I pulled up the email chain with the PDF and the passive-aggressive demands. I clicked reply all, typed a single word, and hit send. No. Then I opened my banking app, found Tiffany's name in my Zelle contacts, and sent her $10. In the memo line, I wrote, for the debut. It was a small, petty act, and it was the most liberating thing I had done in 30 years. The final step was to reclaim my own home. I Googled 24-hour locksmith Charleston, and the click of the dial tone as I called felt like a starting gun. While I waited for him to arrive, I went through my phone. Tiffany. Block. Gary. Block. Mom. Block. With each tap of the screen, I felt a chain breaking. Isn't it strange how the hardest goodbyes are often the ones that finally lead you back to yourself? That night, for the first time in years, the new deadbolt on my front door clicked shut with a sound of absolute finality. It was the sound of peace. For 2 days, my house was quiet. It was the kind of deep, peaceful quiet I didn't even realize I had been missing. The phone didn't ring with a manufactured crisis. My screen didn't flash with passive-aggressive texts. Michael and I had breakfast on the porch, and I could actually taste my coffee. I felt my shoulders, which I hadn't realized were permanently hunched up by my ears, finally begin to relax. It was a fragile, newfound peace. I thought, this is it. This is the hard part, and I've survived it. I was naive to think the war was over. It turned out they had only just begun to fight dirty. On the third morning, as Michael was watching cartoons and I was watering my hydrangeas, there was a knock at the door. It wasn't the friendly rap of a neighbor. It was a firm, authoritative knock that vibrated through the floor. I looked through the peephole and my blood ran cold. 2 police officers stood on my porch. My first thought was that something had happened to someone. My second, more cynical thought was that Tiffany was trying to report her spare key as stolen. The reality was so much worse. I opened the door, and the taller officer addressed me with a polite but firm expression. "Ma'am, are you Esther Vance?" I nodded. "We've received a call regarding a welfare check and a potential financial situation. A report was filed by your mother, Eleanor, and your sister, Tiffany. They've alleged elder financial abuse." The words hung in the air, ugly and foreign. Elder. Financial. Abuse. I had spent my entire life caring for people, protecting the vulnerable. My hands, which had soothed fevers and administered life-saving medicine, suddenly felt cold and numb. They weren't just retaliating, they were trying to professionally and personally assassinate me. They had come for my integrity, my reputation, my very freedom. It's a terrifying escalation when someone decides that if they can't control you, they will try to destroy you. And my family, it seemed, had brought out the heavy artillery. For a moment, the world tilted. My breath caught in my chest, and I could feel my grandson Michael's curious eyes on my back from the living room. The accusation was meant to make me crumble, to shatter me with shame and fear right there on my own doorstep. But they miscalculated. They forgot that for 40 years, my job was to function with absolute clarity in the center of a crisis. As the shock subsided, the nurse in me took over. My heartbeat steadied. My mind went quiet and focused. I took a slow, deliberate breath and looked the taller officer in the eye. "Officers, please come in," I said, my voice even. "I understand you have a job to do. I believe I have everything you need to clear this up." I led them past the living room, giving Michael a reassuring nod, and into my dining room. I walked over to a small wooden filing cabinet in the corner, a piece of furniture they had all probably dismissed as a dusty antique. From the bottom drawer, I pulled out a thick, worn accordion file. On the tab, written in my neatest script, were 2 words: Family Finances. I laid the file on the table and opened it. It was a meticulous, color-coded history of my family's dependency. I had never intended it to be a weapon, only a record. A way to keep track of the loving support that had, over the years, begun to feel like a one-way street. I pulled out the first tab, labeled Gary, Business Ventures. Inside was the promissory note for the $5,000 I'd loaned him for his food truck, signed and defaulted on. Next was Tiffany, Rent and Emergencies, a stack of printed text messages and Venmo screenshots going back a decade. "Esther, can you spot me $500? My car broke down. I need $800. And finally, the thickest section, Mom, Household. It contained 15 years of utility bills, property tax receipts, and insurance payments for her home, all paid with checks from my personal bank account, with copies of the canceled checks attached. I didn't raise my voice. I just laid the papers out, one by one. It's a strange survival skill you learn when you love people you can't fully trust. You become an archivist of your own generosity. And my archive was undeniable. The officers were professional. They reviewed the documents, their expressions shifting from stoic neutrality to something resembling weary understanding. They saw the story the paper told, a story of one-sided sacrifice. The taller officer handed me back a receipt. "Ma'am," he said, his voice softer now, "our report will reflect that the claims are unsubstantiated. My advice? Keep this file somewhere safe." They left, and the house was quiet again, but this time, it was the quiet of a battle won. I knew, however, that a direct assault had failed. My family wouldn't just surrender. When you expose a narcissist, they don't retreat, they simply change their tactics. They take the war to a public court of opinion. Sure enough, that evening, my friend Patty sent me another screenshot. It was a post from Tiffany's Facebook page. The picture was a professionally lit selfie of her looking thoughtfully into the distance, a single, artful tear glistening on her cheek. The caption was a masterclass in manipulation. "Sometimes the hardest thing you'll ever do," she wrote, "is protect your peace from the toxic energy of family members who refuse to be happy for you. It's a painful journey to set boundaries with those who have known you your whole life, but self-love demands it." The comments section was a flood of support from her social circle. "You're so brave. Stay strong, Queen. I know exactly what you mean." She was painting herself as the victim and me as the villain without ever using my name. I felt a wave of helpless anger wash over me. How do you fight a lie like that? And then a new comment appeared. It was from a Mrs. Gable, a woman who had lived down the street from my parents for 50 years, a respected elder from our church. Her comment was polite, public, and utterly devastating. "Tiffany, dear," she wrote. "What a beautiful sentiment. It reminds me of how your sister Esther worked double shifts all summer in '98 to pay for your first car after you crashed your father's. She has always been the anchor in your family's storms. Isn't it a beautiful thing when someone steps into the darkness for you and simply turns on a light? The flood of supportive comments for Tiffany stopped abruptly. There was just Mrs. Gable's comment, sitting there, a quiet, unshakable monument of truth. After Mrs. Gable's comment, a different kind of quiet descended. This wasn't the heavy, accusatory silence from before, but the dead silence of public humiliation. Tiffany's Facebook page suddenly became a ghost town. For a couple of days, there was nothing. No calls, no new posts, no flying monkeys sent to plead their case. A part of me, a small, naive part, hoped this was the end. Maybe the failed police report and the public shaming had finally forced them to reflect. Maybe they understood. But toxic systems don't heal that easily. They just reboot and try a new strategy. When the direct attack failed and the public smear campaign backfired, they moved to the final weapon in the manipulator's handbook, the fake apology. I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. It was my mother. The message was long, a carefully constructed paragraph that was designed to sound like an olive branch but was actually just another leash. Esther, it began. My heart is just broken that things have gotten to this point. I know you've been under so much stress lately, raising Michael all on your own. I think there have been terrible misunderstandings on all sides. Families are complicated, and we all say things we don't mean when we're hurt. She wasn't apologizing for her actions. She was blaming my stress for my reaction to her actions. It was a classic non-apology. She ended with a final, desperate attempt to pull me back into line. At the end of the day, we are family. Let's not let a silly disagreement about money ruin that. Tiffany is still holding your table at the ball. Just contribute what you can, and let's put this ugliness behind us. I read the words, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger or hurt. I just felt tired. It was all so predictable. The script was so old and worn out, and I was finally seeing it for what it was. Have you ever received an apology that was actually just a demand for you to forget what they did? It wasn't a bridge, it was a trap. And I wasn't walking into it. I read my mother's text message one more time, not with anger, but with the detached interest of a scientist observing a specimen. Every word, every comma was a calculated move in a game I was no longer willing to play. I didn't reply. I didn't argue or defend myself. I simply held my finger down on the message and pressed delete. The little puff of digital smoke as the message vanished felt like a deep, cleansing exhale. For a full day, the silence returned, and I allowed myself to hope that this was truly the end of it. But when you cut off the supply to a narcissist, they don't just give up. They enter a frantic stage of panic, trying every tool left in their toolbox. The next afternoon, a text from another unknown number lit up my screen. This one wasn't my mother's calculated prose. It was pure, unfiltered desperation, and it was from Tiffany. Esther, it's me. I had to use a friend's phone. You need to call Mom. She's a wreck. She hasn't eaten since yesterday, just sits in her chair staring out the window. Gary said he heard her crying all night. Is this what you wanted? Are you happy now that you've broken her heart? You are tearing this family apart over a stupid party, over your own pride. What is wrong with you? She is your mother. Whatever point you think you're making, you've made it. Now be a decent human being, call her, and fix this before you do permanent damage that you will regret for the rest of your life. It was a fire hose of guilt, sprayed directly at me. But the strange thing was, I didn't feel it. A year ago, those words would have shattered me. Now, they were just noise. It was like watching a bad play where I was the only person in the room who knew the actors were faking. Don't you find that once you see the true pattern in someone's behavior, you can never unsee it? The curtain had been pulled back, and there was no magic left. I looked at Tiffany's frantic text, and I felt nothing but a profound sense of finality. Arguing with her would be like trying to reason with a hurricane. Any response, anger, defense, even a simple request to be left alone, would be seen as engagement, as fuel for her drama. They had weaponized emotion, so I decided to remove emotion from the equation entirely. They had tried to use the law against me, so I decided to use the law to protect myself. The next morning, I didn't text any of them back. Instead, I made an appointment with a family law attorney whose office was in a quiet, historic building downtown. I walked in, sat down in a leather chair across from a calm, professional woman, and for the first time, I told the whole story to someone who wasn't emotionally invested. I laid out the photos, the texts, and the police report. She listened without interruption, her expression never changing. When I was finished, she simply nodded. "This is a clear pattern of harassment, Mrs. Vance," she said. "We can put a stop to this." The relief I felt in that moment was immense. I wasn't just a tired sister or a grieving daughter anymore, I was a client. My pain was now a case, and my feelings were evidence. She drafted a letter. It was a formal cease and desist, a document of beautiful, ice-cold clarity. It stated that any further contact by phone, email, text message, social media, or through any third party would be considered a violation and would result in immediate legal action. She sent it via certified mail to my mother, my sister, and my brother that afternoon. I paid the lawyer's retainer fee, and it felt like I was buying back my own peace of mind. It was an admission that this problem had grown beyond my ability to fix it myself. Isn't there a tremendous power in finally admitting you don't have to fight every battle alone? I had hired a professional to build a wall I could no longer hold up by myself. And it was the best money I had ever spent. The lawyer's letter was met with a deafening silence. It was a silence I had initiated, a boundary I had paid to erect, and it was the most peaceful sound I had ever heard. The weeks leading up to the debutante ball came and went, and for the first time in my adult life, I was not involved in my family's drama. I didn't know if they had found another sponsor, if the party was still on, or what new crisis had erupted. And the most miraculous thing was, I didn't care. Michael and I were busy planning our own small adventure, a weekend camping trip to the nearby Francis Marion National Forest. We were packing our sleeping bags and debating the merits of different kinds of trail mix while they were, I assumed, debating tablecloth colors and floral arrangements. The night of the ball, Michael and I sat by a crackling campfire, roasting marshmallows under a vast, starry sky. There was no orchestra, no champagne, just the chirp of crickets and the quiet joy of being present. The following Monday, I got a call from my friend, Patty. "Well," she said, her voice a mix of gossip and sympathy. "I went to the big show on Saturday. I felt like I had to, for appearances. Honey, you didn't miss a thing." She proceeded to paint a picture not of a glamorous high society event, but of a deeply awkward and hollow affair. She said at least a third of the tables were empty. The whispers about the family drama were apparently the main event of the evening. Tiffany, she said, looked stressed and furious, spending most of the night in a heated, whispered argument with the event planner. My mother sat at her table looking pale and tight-lipped, barely speaking to anyone. It was like a beautiful, expensive ship with a giant hole in the side, and everyone was just pretending it wasn't sinking, Patty concluded. They had their party. They had the ballroom and the orchestra. But it was an empty victory. It's a hard lesson to learn that you can't build a beautiful life on an ugly foundation. The cracks will always, always show. I hung up the phone with Patty, and the emotion that settled over me wasn't triumph. Not really. It was a profound, quiet sadness for them. They had orchestrated this grand performance of family and status, only to be met with empty chairs and whispers. They got exactly what they'd built, a beautiful, hollow room. In the past, their misery would have become my problem to solve. I would have been on the phone, trying to soothe my mother's wounded pride, listening to Tiffany blame everyone but herself. But now, there was just silence. And in that silence, my own life began to grow. The change wasn't loud or dramatic. It was in the small things. It was making breakfast for Michael and not feeling a jolt of anxiety every time my phone buzzed. It was planning our own budget for the month and realizing that for the first time, it was actually our budget, not a slush fund for my family's latest emergency. One afternoon, we were in the backyard, planting a small vegetable garden. Michael was meticulously digging a hole for a tomato plant, his face serious with concentration. He looked up at me and asked, "Grandma, are we mad at great, Grandma?" The question was so simple, so pure. I stopped what I was doing and met his gaze. "No, sweetie," I said carefully. "We're not mad, we're just quiet for a while. Sometimes grown-ups need a timeout to remember how to be kind to each other. So this year, we're going to focus on our own garden." He nodded, accepting it with the simple wisdom of a child, and went back to his digging. In that moment, I understood what real wealth was. For years, I was terrified of being written out of a will, of losing a piece of a house. I realized the true inheritance I needed to give my grandson wasn't money. It was peace. It was a home free from drama. It was the living example of a woman who knew her own worth. When was the last time you stopped and truly asked yourself what legacy you want to leave behind? I had found mine, right there in the rich soil of my own backyard. The quiet that filled my home in the following months wasn't empty. It was fertile. The energy I had once spent managing my family's self-made crises was now mine to reinvest. For the first time, I had surplus not just of money, but of time and of self. And so, I began to rebuild my life, not around obligation, but around joy. I started having coffee with my friend Patty every Tuesday morning, a simple ritual that felt like a radical act of self-care. I joined a book club at the local library, and I discovered that I still had opinions about characters and plot, opinions that had been buried under years of listening to other people's problems. Michael and I finished our vegetable garden, and the simple act of pulling a fresh tomato from a vine that we had planted and nurtured felt more rewarding than any grudging thank you I had ever received from my family. One day, I opened a new $529 college savings plan for Michael. As I transferred the first deposit, I thought about all the money I had poured into my brother's failed businesses and my sister's expensive tastes. This felt different. This wasn't a rescue. It was an investment. I wasn't plugging a leak in a sinking ship. I was building a new one, strong and seaworthy, for my grandson's future. It was the best feeling in the world. I realized my life hadn't become smaller by cutting them out. It had become infinitely larger, because now there was finally room for me. The constant, low-grade anxiety that had been my lifelong companion had vanished, replaced by a calm sense of possibility. What is one thing you would do with your time if you weren't so busy managing someone else's chaos? For me, it was learning how to simply be. It was rediscovering the woman who existed beyond the titles of daughter, sister, and fixer. I was just Esther. And for the first time, that felt like more than enough. Looking back on it all now, from this quiet shore of my new life, it feels like a story that happened to someone else. It's strange how the storm, when you're in it, feels like it will last forever. The wind howls, the rain blinds you, and you're just trying to hold on. But storms do pass, and when the clouds finally part, the silence they leave behind is a gift, and the world looks clean and new. I learned that family isn't about blood, it's about respect. It's about reciprocity. It's a garden that everyone must tend to. If you find you are the only one with a watering can, you are not in a garden. You are in a desert, and it will drain you until you are dust. I don't check their social media anymore. I don't know what happened with the debt from that hollow party, or what my mother does with her quiet days. I had to let go of needing to see justice served. Because the ultimate justice wasn't watching them fail, it was watching myself flourish. The natural consequence of their choices was a life without my support. The consequence of mine was a life finally full of my own. And that brings me to the last, and hardest, lesson. Forgiveness. For a long time, I thought I could never forgive them. But I realized I was focusing on the wrong people. The most important forgiveness I needed to grant was to myself. Forgiving myself for the decades I spent accepting a fraction of the love I gave. Forgiving myself for believing my worth was tied to my usefulness. Forgiving myself for not teaching them how to treat me by showing them my own boundaries sooner. That's the forgiveness that sets you free. It's the final act of reclaiming your story. So, if you are out there, feeling like the unpaid emotional accountant for your family, I want you to hear this. Your peace is not a negotiation. It is your birthright. You are allowed to put down the ledger, walk away from the noise, and build a quiet home within yourself. Thank you for letting me share a peace of mind with you.